Hands up if you've nailed your pricing. Just as I expected. Not many hands up at all. Looks like we'd better get the pricing lady in to sort us all out. It's a priceless episode 603 of the 13-year-old award-winning Small Business Big Marketing podcast.
Well, I said, welcome to a small business marketing show where successful small business owners share their souls to take your marketing straight to the lead. Now, here's your host, Mr. Timbo Reid.
And welcome back to your weekly dose of well-priced marketing. Thank you very much. I'm your host, Timbo Reid, and I have an insatiable curiosity for uncovering marketing ideas that help businesses just like yours, exactly like yours, to grow. How? Through weekly, in-depth conversations with successful business founders. You, infinitely more importantly, are a motivated business owner ready to crank out some great marketing to build that beautiful business of yours into the empire it absolutely deserves to be. As per usual, team, there is marketing GOLD dripping from the ceiling over here at Small Business Big Marketing's HQ. So let's get stuck right in.
Hi, Timbo. This is Pamela. I'm from Kiama, south coast of Sydney. I'm creating a new product, and I've never had a product business before. Oh, it's always been service. And I've only just discovered your podcast. My partner introduced me a couple of weeks ago, and I've listened to 3 or 4 every day. I'm absolutely loving it. I would love it if you could recommend some that's specifically, it's a novelty product that I'm developing, and I'm going to get trademarked and everything. And it's literally early days. You know, I've just bought the domain name and, you know, signing up the social media pages and all that, and then still in the process of getting the product made and designed, and took your advice to do one design. So I listened to that podcast. That was great. That was very helpful. And the SEO one, which was also very helpful. And anything else that you could recommend that would be great for me to begin with. I have no knowledge in marketing, so you're my first introducing me to all this. I would, appreciate any feedback, and hopefully one day I could be on your show and share my empire enterprise story. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Camilla, I hope I got your name right. Thank you so much for taking the time to ring the Small Business Big Marketing Hotline. Good luck with your new product business. Always exciting for a service-based business owner to go into a product-based business, because I think it goes, you're taking the intangible and moving into something tangible, and that's got to be good. Episode-wise, every episode, all 603, have got something valuable in them in some way. So, like, given you're a new business, there's all sorts of things you need to cover. So I can't really identify one, but this one about pricing that you're about to hear is a pretty good place to start, because you want to get your pricing right. I'd also encourage you to look outside your industry for new thinking, new ideas. Often that's where there is magic, because your competitors often aren't doing that. I'd encourage you to surround yourself with positivity too, Camilla. You know, positive people, read positive stuff. When you start a new business, there's always going to be a naysayer or 3. Just thank them and move on. And join this Facebook tribe. Join the Small Business Big Marketing Facebook tribe, and you will be surrounded for free with about 2,500 people just like you. Everyone else, be like Camilla. Call me 0480 015 150 and let me know what marketing is working for that beautiful business of yours. A big thank you to listener Daniel Annette Stewart of Radiant Signs for bringing Janene Liston, aka the Pricing Lady, to my attention. Now, from what I can tell, pricing is one of those business activities that freaks the majority of business owners out. Do you agree? And if you get your pricing wrong, it can have a huge impact on the growth of your business, or worse, which raises so many questions like, how do you best decide what to charge? Should you copy your competition's pricing? When should you include prices on your website? When, if ever, should you discount? Are you charging too much, too little? So many questions about pricing. No wonder I got Janene on. She answers them all, plus a whole lot more, let me tell you. She's a genius at making sense of how to price your goods or services, as well as how you should speak, act, and market your brand to achieve the optimal price. Bet you haven't given that any thought. I hadn't. Speaking about your brand to achieve the ultimate, goodness me. Now, Janene is an engineering graduate and has a deep interest in bridges, which begs the question, how on earth did she become a world specialist on pricing?
Well, in some ways you could say it was by accident, and others you might say, divine intervention. I'm not sure which. But when I left my job as a structural engineer, I decided that it wasn't what I wanted to do forever, and I didn't know what I wanted. I ended up in a company and made my way around to product management. And the first thing they gave me was a price list, and it was 20 years old.
Oh, well, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Or if it did work, you run at a loss.
You'd be surprised how many companies operate in such a way. And so I didn't have a whole lot of commercial experience at the time, but I knew that that wasn't right. It didn't sit well with me. And so I took it upon myself, not only to redo that, but I noticed other things, like it was taking us weeks to get offers out the door rather than a day or two, that we were reinventing the wheel every time that we did it. So not only did I redo the prices themselves and the positioning, but the pricing structure and how we made offers and so on. So really, I kind of fell into it, and it was just my own logic. I can say at that point in time, I wouldn't have called that what I was doing. I wouldn't have called it pricing. But fast forward about 8 or 9 years, I had moved to Switzerland from the US, and then I decided to stay here and needed a job, and Siemens hired me as their global pricing manager. And that was when I really got into pricing, and it's been all pricing all the time. But the funny thing about that is about 3 months into the job, I switched bosses. And this was a new role for the company and a new role for me. And when I switched bosses, about 3 months after that new boss started, he came in one day and he's like, Janene, I have no idea what you should be doing. And I said, you know what? Neither do I.
Good. Leave it to me. I'll figure it out.
I said, but there is a certification program, a certified pricing professional put on by the Pricing Society, and I'd like to go do that. What do you think? And he said, where do I sign? So
go for it.
Yeah.
I mean, we are here to talk pricing, but I am fascinated, as are my audience, by people's journeys. You know, you study one thing and become another, and it's all accurate. It all leads to the place where we're meant to be. And clearly, you are someone who absolutely loves pricing, which I love because it completely bamboozles me and probably the rest of my audience. Now, Janene, I have a list of questions, and often in these interviews that I do, it's sort of time sequential. So you did this and you did that. Today is not that type of interview. Today is just a bombardment by me of questions about something that frightens the pants off most business owners. No matter how smart, no matter how informed, no matter how intelligent they are, it scares them. So if you could
fire
just
away.
Good on you. Thank you for that luxury, because there is no order to this. But I will start with the most obvious question, and some would say a dumb question. What is pricing?
No, not a dumb question at all. I love this question. And one of the reasons I love this question is that most people's definition of pricing is so narrow that it doesn't actually set them up for success. Yeah. So most people think that pricing is the search for this number. And when they find this number, all their problems will be solved. Yeah. I know that I'm being a little bit cheeky about how I say this, but I mean, that's the way people kind of behave when it comes to pricing. But in my experience, pricing is about 3 things. It's about how you set your prices, how you get your prices, and how you manage them over time. And it's not an activity per se that you do once every year or once every 5 years. It is a way of being or behaving in your business.
Wow.
And that's the difference.
I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it, pricing? Because it is absolutely mission critical to the success of a business. And yet, I guess, in my experience, and maybe you're the same, it's something that we as business owners desperately try to avoid or give little attention to, and set them probably based on what the competition are doing, or set them on what cost of goods plus 10% or something is, and it's just not something that we give a lot of attention to, yet it's incredibly important.
Yeah, it is. So there was a study done quite a few years ago, but it's just math. So it's as relevant now as it was then when it was done by McKinsey about the power of pricing and the power of 1%. So if you have an accountant or a CFO, then you can really usually stump them for a short period of time with this question. Ask them, what's the impact of a 1% price change on my profitability? And this was what the study was about. There are only 4 things that affect profit in any business: price, volume, fixed costs, and variable costs. That's it. That's all you have to work with. That's it. If you're a purely service-based business, you might only have 3 because you don't have variable costs, right? But what they found, so they took the S&P from the US, the stock exchange from the US, the S&P 1500, and they said, what is the impact of a 1% price change? All other things remaining the same. What's the impact on profit? And what they found on average for these companies, a 1% impact, a 1% change in price had an 8% impact on profit on average for these companies.
Wow.
Which is huge.
Huge.
And that was much more significant than a 1% improvement in each of the other levers.
Mm-hmm. So this is a significant and very sensitive lever. Tell me,
Yes.
What do you think it is that freaks us all out about pricing? Is it just the fact that it seems mathematical, it seems clinical, it seems incredibly complicated, and other things in business just seem a lot easier? Product selection, marketing, HR, they just seem just a little bit more. And I'm talking on. I mean, maybe I'm representing me, who likes the more emotional sides of business and not the rational stuff. But what is it about it that freaks many of us out?
I think there's a few things. I think of those 4 levers that we just spoke about, costs are fairly transparent, visible. You don't have to go anywhere external to find that because the information is pretty much in-house for the most part. But if you're a startup, then of course you have to go do some research. But if you're operating, so it's tangible, it's real, it's there, it's something concrete. And volume, most people believe they have a real ability to turn it on and off. Right? But pricing feels less tangible. And at some level, I think most people understand that it's not necessarily based always on something that you can physically calculate. We like to think it's a mathematical calculation, but the best pricing usually is a thought process first and foremost. There's 2 things that you have to be managing when it comes to your pricing, and that's your positioning and the execution.
Positioning mean literally brand positioning?
Your price positioning. So I call it the leaky bucket of pricing.
I like this. I like the fact that you make something relatively dry quite interesting. Well done to you. That's why you're on this show. What's the leaky bucket of pricing?
The leaky bucket of pricing. So this came about years ago. I was in a large corporation and the C-level was having this debate. What should we be spending our money on when it comes to improving pricing? Should we be focusing on value pricing, which is how we position ourselves, or should we be focusing on transactional pricing, which is how we execute? And my boss, who was not a pricing expert at the time, came to me and said, you got to shut this down because I'm tired of this conversation. And I said, well, the answer is both. And I wrote this paper about the leaky bucket. And the leaky bucket is this. So we have a bucket and we want to fill it with profits. Yeah. Now, value pricing or your positioning is like the tap on the faucet. So if you were trying to turn the tap on, how well you position yourself determines the water pressure, if you will, on the tap. The better you position yourself, the better the profit flows into the bucket. But on the other side, if you're suffering from what I call discount-itis, or if you're granting a lot of unnecessary discounts, then you may have high water pressure, but you've got holes in your bucket like crazy from the execution side, and you're hemorrhaging profits out the backside of your bucket. Or maybe your water pressure is really low. There's different combinations here. You have to focus on both. And most people, when it comes to pricing, are so focused on how they position themselves that they aren't necessarily paying attention to how they're giving away money on the backside of what they're doing on every transaction.
Could you give us a real life example of that, Janene?
Yeah, of course. So I'm going to talk about really small business for a moment, like a micro business. And let's say it's a coach, for example, and they have said, I'm going to sell my services, my package for $3,000 every time I do it. But then they have a Black Friday special and they sell it for $2,500. And then it's Tuesday on the 7th month of the year, and they decide to have a special for that date. And then one school comes in and says, well, we need you to coach a whole bunch of people. We'll have about 10. So what's the special price you can give them? So then you give them a special price. Now this coach plans.
There's a lot of holes forming in this bucket.
Exactly. And what happens, people plan with 3,000 times X number of clients, and they're like, oh yeah, I can meet my target, no problem. And then at the end of the year, often they've had more sales than they anticipated, but because of all the discounting, they haven't reached their target at all.
Much less margin. So let's talk about discounting. I was hoping we get there later in the conversation, but discounting is something that it just seems so easy. Oh, we want more sales, drop the price. My limited knowledge of pricing, and I always say, discounting's a dead-end street. No one wins in discounting except the customer, which, that's not a bad thing because we're here to represent the customer. But, hey, we've got to feed the family. We've got to make a living. So is discounting, am I right, is discounting a dead-end street? And I understand that you have a number of questions you need to ask yourself before deciding to discount. Am I on the money there? Excuse the pun.
There are, yeah. So the discounts have a place in some businesses. Yeah. What I'm talking about is unnecessary discounting. Perfect example of an unnecessary discount is to offer a customer a discount just because they're a new client.
Well, that sets a precedent. They're never going to pay more.
Right? Yeah. But people do it all the time. And I've had clients who do it. I'm like, well, why are you doing that? Well, because I just want them to be a new client. Yeah. I was like, yeah, but where's the exchange of value? That's it. I'm desperate. That's the message. In my opinion, that's the message that it's giving, right? You're saying, well, my price is X. My price is 50,000, but because you're new, I'll give it to you for 45. Yeah. So you're actually destroying the value of your offer. You're saying, well, it's not really worth 50 if you're a first-time client. It's only worth 45,000. It's illogical. So my problem with discounting is that it destroys value. It's a toxic habit that people get into. And one of the things that young businesses tend to do is they try to buy off customers with heavy discounting rather than creating partnerships where you may offer a lower price in exchange for something of value. So I like to think of a scale, price on one side and value on the other. And we're always trying to keep that price value scale in balance.
So let me just understand what you're saying there. What you're saying is, well, there's two things that you said. There is a role for discounting. First of all, I'm interested to know, what role is that? Is that a once a year, I'm a good business person, therefore I'm happy to give you a discount once a year? Is that its role? And if one isn't to discount, what's the opposite of discounting if you want to get the business? Well, adding value. Is that right? Adding value is
changing, adjusting value. Sometimes it's not always adding. That's why I say
what do you mean by changing value versus adding value?
Okay, so back to the scale. If you have this price value scale and someone says, ooh, that's too expensive, if you adjust on the price side, there's only one way to go, right? You have no other option, right? If you adjust on the value side, you can remove value from the offer in order to arrive at a lower price.
Yeah.
Or you can say, I can't change the price, but I can add this in, right? So you have more opportunity, you have more options, really, if you operate on the value side of the price value scale.
So let's just on that coaching example you gave, the coach is asking for $3,000. Let's say it's for a month of coaching and it's a new client. That coach can go, I'll give you 10% off and we'll start at a much cheaper rate, which is not a great idea because it's always harder to go up than it is down. Or I can play with the value that I give you. I can remove any parachute calls that I'm going to offer you, which is, call me in between sessions and I'll help you out for 5 minutes on a call. Can't give you those if you want a cheaper price. Or I can give you a couple of ebooks that I've written, which again, as the coach, low cost to me, high perceived value to the client. Is that what we're talking about here?
Exactly. It's really about playing with the value side of things as opposed to the price side of things. Now, there may be a time and place where you need to play with the price. If you go to certain countries or geographies, discounting and haggling over the price is part of the culture, and you can't get away from it, right? But you understand that before you go into the conversation, and you're prepared for that.
One of my favorite quotes around marketing is the best marketing is a great product or a great service. Yeah, that's now Apple. And this is a podcast for the smaller end of town, for the small business owner. So I don't really like quoting the biggest organization in the world, but Apple don't discount. They just don't discount. I have never seen a price tag in an Apple store where one price has been crossed. Okay. So, and they don't even offer any additional value. You can't say, listen, I'm happy to pay full freight for that MacBook Pro, but can you throw in a couple of AirPods? They're just going to laugh at you. So what's there? Is there a strategy of arrogance and we have the best product in the world, so like it or lump it?
No, to me, it's part of the pricing strategy, right? So one thing that a lot of businesses overlook is that pricing is there to help you meet your business objectives. So you have to be clear about what that objective is. Are you going after market share purely? Are you going after revenue growth? Are you going after profit? And that will, in some context, determine what you do with your prices. Now, your branding is also very influential, not just in your price positioning, but how you behave around your prices. And I think for Apple, it's actually a lot about behavior and how they behave. And it's related to that branding more than anything else. It's like, you go into Louis Vuitton, they have little teeny price tags with little teeny numbers that end in zeros usually, right? And you don't see 50% off on Black Friday, right? You would never see that with Louis Vuitton. But
do I look like I go to Louis Vuitton?
Well, I don't either.
I'm just nodding my head, going, "Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about." Yeah.
Who else could that be?
So that raises the question then about why do we pay more for brands, which we do, and this absolutely applies to the plumber around the corner just as much as it does to the Apple shop down the road. A brand, and as a marketer, I guess I rattle on about brands a lot, but they're important because brands can charge more and they engender confidence, familiarity, and therefore, once you got that as a consumer, it's like you become probably a bit less price sensitive. Is that how it works?
It can be, yeah, that can be. Would I call it price sensitivity? That's why I'm hesitating. I would phrase it differently as a willingness to pay, as opposed to reduced price sensitivity. Yeah, if it's really brand related, and that's how I would phrase it. Let's put it that way. More that you're improving the willingness to pay. I love that all of my Mac devices work together. And I've thought several times about going to a non-Mac computer.
You and me
then
both.
I thought, nope, I'm not doing it because it all usually works together very nicely and it functions well. And then I'll be at a friend's house and I'll see them turn on their laptop and I'm like, gosh, that's taking a long time. For that non-Mac computer.
I do have to say, Dell is a sponsor of this program, and Dell computers do have a beautiful simplicity about them. Hello to my friends at Dell.
I used to have a Dell. Actually, I had a couple of Dells along the way.
I like Adele. She's a wonderful singer. And by the way, I love that willingness to pay versus a reduction in price sensitivity. It's a nice way of looking at it. And so much of this pricing discussion is psychological, is about mindset.
It's very important that your brand and your price, not just the price itself, but your own behavior and your team's behavior around price are aligned with your brand. So something I often see with small companies is that they, on the one hand, they may position themselves towards the more premium side, but then their behavior shows something very different.
Yeah. I guess just to finish that brand discussion, like I'm actually thinking about a local plumber around the corner who has built a brand. He's got uniforms, he's got a great logo, the consistency across, his trucks and his advertising and his website, and everything's just got this wonderful consistency about it, which doesn't cost any more to be consistent versus to not be consistent. And then when you speak to him and his people, there is a kind of a consistency around the visual brand versus the verbal brand. And it's like you do feel confidence, and your willingness to pay whatever he's asking is high. So that's good. I like that.
It does. It has a big influence. People will often come to me for help and they're like, well, I just sell what everybody else sells. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, so shouldn't I just price how everybody else does? And I was like, well, there are, probably 100 companies that sell bottled water, but they don't all charge the same. There are probably another 100 or so more companies that sell coffee. They sell coffee at very different prices. And it's not always related to the quality of the coffee. Sometimes it's related to the customer experience. Sometimes it's related to the perception of the brand. Sometimes it's related to who is in the commercial.
Yeah. That's right. Is George Clooney, your spokesperson, or is you got to recover those costs somehow?
So it's related to many different things. What I try to impress upon my clients is that what you want is pick your zone and then, behave in relation to that. If you're going to be at the premium end, or you're going to position yourself as being a premium offer, then you can't go around offering Valentine's Day discounts or, it's Tuesday afternoon, so I'll give the first 700 of you, a free this or a that. It it mixes the message. That's the better way to put it. It mixes up the message. And even though clients may not be able to say, or customers may not be able to say, well, this isn't right because of this, they will feel something at a more subconscious level, which will influence their decision not to purchase something.
Just talking about we touched on competition earlier, and it is very, very easy. And it would seem just the obvious way to price something based on what your competition are doing. And I'm going to reference things like, at the average cafe from where I live, an Eggs Benedict is probably about $19. And it doesn't matter which cafe you go to. It may vary by $1 or $2, but it's around $19. If you go to a chiropractor around where I live, it's generally around $80 a visit, right? And every chiropractor is the same, which says to me they're all just following each other because they're too scared to be infinitely cheaper or infinitely more expensive than what the mean is. And yet each cafe and each chiropractor and every other business that's following that model, they don't have the same running costs. They don't have the same HR costs, real estate costs, all these other costs. So someone's losing there. What do they do about that? Well, I suppose that leads us to the question, how should they be pricing? Is there a secret formula that we can all use to arrive at the optimal price for our business?
Yeah,
and if there is, this will be a very quick interview and we can finish it.
And I'm out of a job.
You're out of a job.
No, those are really, really great questions. And you're right. So I spoke about costs being relevant and easy to get and tangible. And in some ways, for many industries, competitor information feels easy to get. But what's happening, why these industries tend to have the same prices? I don't know about healthcare in Australia, but sometimes that can be dictated by healthcare companies. So it could be the case. But for something like restaurants, so probably there's one of two things going on. Most likely their accountant is using a cost accounting process for price setting. And probably they're sourcing food from fairly similar places. And maybe the costs are running about the same. Now, if they were doing this based upon the competition, then you're right. They would come out, usually most people will look at what everybody else is doing and choose something in the middle. And if they're new, a little bit less. There's a few problems with that. So first of all, you're assuming that they have the same target clients. You're assuming that they are profitable and that that's a good price to have. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you're assuming that they have the same cost structure, as you said. And if you're not testing those assumptions before you accept that that is a good price for you, then you're kind of rolling the dice with with the profitability in your business.
Yeah. So why let competitors dictate what you're going to price? But it then does, it's tricky because
you want to understand where you are.
You need to understand your market. You need to understand your ideal customer. I mean, and that's just any part of marketing of which pricing is a component part. I could be the pricing guy.
You and I are on the same wavelength here. So thank you very much, because your question that you asked was, how do we set prices? Now, is there a mathematical formula? In my opinion, no. What there is a thought process. And that thought process starts with the
ideal customer. Funny that. As should all business.
Yeah, exactly.
Work backwards.
And what most people do, so your product people will go, oh, I've developed this really cool thing. Now let me go figure out who to sell it to, right? That's where most people start, or service-based business. I do this really great thing. Now let me figure out who I can go sell it to. What we should be doing is say, I want to serve these people. They have these problems. I can help solve that problem in this way for this group of people specifically. And therefore the value of that is this. So my formula, if you will, or thought process that I use with my clients is customer, offer, value. I lead with the customer in order to determine the value that my offer brings them. Then I do two checks, one on marketplace and one on cost and profit.
So marketplace being what's the competition doing?
Yeah. How am I positioned in the marketplace? Yeah. So it's not about saying, what is everybody else doing and how does that, what does that mean? Wait, I'm saying that wrong. It's about understanding where you are positioned in the marketplace, and does that make sense with what your customer is looking for and the type of value that you're delivering those people.
There's so much weird psychology around pricing. You mentioned Louis Vuitton before, and I cannot believe, I don't know much about Louis Vuitton or any of these fancy brands, but I know they charge a lot of money for stuff that you could get elsewhere that provides the same function for a lot less, but you're paying for the name and you're paying for the brand and the fashion statement and all that kind of stuff. Is it with pricing, Janene, that there is this sliding scale of the higher the price for a particular product or service, the better it must be in a consumer's mind? And then is there a diminishing return on that at some point?
Yeah, of course there is. So yes, definitely. To some extent, if it costs more, people's first instinct or first impression is that it is more valuable. However, and can I tell you exactly where the point is where this happens? Not
No.
necessarily, but most of us have an instinct for where our BS meter starts dinging, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, do you know what the cost is of the most expensive pen, like a writing pen in the world is? What the price of it is? $1.4 million.
I was going to say it's in the millions. I mean, how does that even work?
It's a pen. Ding, 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 ding. But this thing is made with platinum and diamonds and the whole 9 yards. And to somebody out there, it is absolutely worth every penny.
But I suppose that's a
me.
great example of that pen manufacturer. Is it Mont Blanc or Cartier or one of those fancy brands?
Remember who.
They have done the work on their target market, on their best ideal customer, and their ideal customer, it probably comes up that their ideal customer has more money to do, than they know what to do with. Having items like that are a status symbol, and to be able to tell someone in a meeting that you're not going to believe this, but this pen's worth 1.4. Yeah. Bang, look at that. So for that small amount of people, and I guess they don't have to sell a whole lot of pens at 1.4 because, that it is incredible. I mean, I didn't know about that pen, but I assume it can't cost more than $100,000 to make, if that.
You would think, yeah. And that's another great point. I mean, a lot of people think that they falsely think, so this is one of the myths of pricing. They believe that the cost is what should determine the price. And that's why they use a cost plus methodology. But let me pose this question. If that were true, then every time you went to the grocery store, before you decided which apples to buy, you would be standing there, thinking about how much it cost the farmer to produce it, the reseller to bring it from the farm to the store, and the store to do what they do to bring it to you and sell it. Now, if that were the case, people would be standing in the produce aisles running calculations in their head about the cost of that. It's not people are not thinking about that. The last time you bought a watch, did you think about what it cost the watch manufacturer to make? It is not in most cases, and I'm sure there's one or two listeners out there who will be going, yeah, but I do it, because there's always one or two that, roll that way. But the vast majority of people who are purchasing things are not thinking about what it costs the company to produce the thing. It's not part of the buying decision-making process.
No. Why would they worry about that? We only listen to one radio station, as I keep saying, and it's called WIIFM. What's in it for me? Just talking about, again, part of pricing something is, and part of understanding your ideal customer is understanding what problem they have that my business or that the business can solve, yeah? And the bigger the problem and the more elegant the solution, you would therefore assume that business can charge more. How do you measure the dollar value of the problem that your customer has, or can't you?
So I guess I measure it. Do I measure the problem? I measure the value. So when I work with clients, we use something called the Show Me the Money Matrix.
And does Tom Cruise come in and present that?
No. Otherwise, I could charge more. No. And so we look in generally 4 areas. We look at the value. We ask the question, how does my offer, how does it help my customer reduce risk, improve quality, be more competitive, or bring economic efficiency? Because those are things that are tangible and that you can calculate. Now, at the center of this money matrix is also a little circle, which is intangibles. Those are harder to calculate, but it's good to still try and attach a value to that, to see how, those numbers add up. And I tell you, when we do this exercise, it is extremely powerful because people they see their prices in a completely different context than they did before.
No doubt.
Because now they see, I had a client a couple of years ago who brought services to the pharma industry. And when we talked about risk, the risk in their case was that if the pharma company didn't have this in order, it was shut down manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. That's worth a lot to them.
It was a $4.5 billion company or something like that.
Right.
Right.
Just a small pharmaceutical company.
And they're like, yeah, but we're trying to find ways to reduce the price of our offer. And I was like, well, you're telling them that this service is, say, $250,000, but what's at risk is $4 billion. Even if you say only half of it's at risk or only 10% of it is risk, it's still a business case. It's a no-brainer, right? And when you understand that gives, I call it like this, it's like this little secret that gives you this spring in your step, and it gives you confidence to say, yeah, this price is reasonable. It is fair to both of us, as long as you've done the work to make sure it's fair to you as well, right? And you have the potential to earn more from that. So to me, it's about calculating the economic value of what you deliver. And let me be clear, a benefit or a feature of your product or service is not necessarily valuable to the customer. So you have to focus on what's of value to them, not what you think is cool and neat.
And what a great question. There's a number of questions to answer when identifying your ideal customer. And one of them is, I'm going to add that to my list. What do they value the most when dealing with an organisation like yours or in an industry like yours? I love that. Tell me, Janene, should we always be aiming to charge as much as possible?
That's a great question. I don't know that I would state it as much as possible. I think it goes back again to what's your pricing strategy, i.e., how are you going to use pricing to help you reach your business objectives? Now, if your objective is to gain,
it's not going to help volume if you're going to charge as much as possible.
If your objective is to gain market share as fast as possible, and you're in a high volume industry, and your customer is looking for the best price on the market, the cheapest price on the market, then of course that doesn't hold true. What I think I would rephrase maybe the question or rephrase the statement in a way that, the best price for your strategy or for your objective or something along those lines. So it's always a trade-off. And that's why, yes, you got to understand who your customer is. And if your customer is looking for the cheapest price and you've positioned yourself as a good value for money, then you're going to have a hard time selling to that target group because they're looking for the cheapest thing that they can find. But let me say one thing about an economy strategy. So an economy strategy is generally very difficult for small businesses to sustain. And the reason for that is that you have to have the lowest cost basis in the market, not just now, but you have to continue to have that going forward in order to be able to deliver the lowest price in the market. And that's generally very difficult for small businesses to maintain over time.
Got it. Tell me the difference between these three prices, and there might not be any. $995, $997, and $999.
There should be a fourth one in there, 1,000.
Oh, yes. All right, you can add that. What's the difference from a consumer's point of view?
So it goes back to who they are and what they're looking for, your brand, and there's a certain point where it becomes more about what you feel is right for your business. So, this whole question comes down to, in part the ending on numbers. And there is research that shows that people, when you have 9 at the end of the number, so 999 instead of 1,000, that people perceive 900 versus 1,000 at a subconscious level. That's the first impression, and that it's cheaper. And so they're willing to pay. More people will buy if it's 999 than if it's 1,000. But if you are a premium offer or positioned as a premium offer, that 9 at the end actually shows the customer something else, because 9s, if you go into, I don't know what stores you have in Australia that are kind of your, like a Walmart or Kmart or a Target or something like that, your lower end stores, right? So they typically end in 9s for this reason, but your high-end luxury stores do not, because they're not trying to play those games. They want you to know it's a big fat round price. Right? Because that's part of the prestige of buying whatever that luxury good is. So you have to be careful about, do those 9s align with your brand positioning or not? Or if you're a company that's all about transparency, you may not want to use 9s and 7s and 5s because it's perceived by your target group, your target customer, as pricing trickery and voodoo, right? Which might have a negative connotation associated with it. So there's not a straight up answer here in terms of this equals that, but there are some considerations. Does it fit my brand? Is it what my people are looking for? Does it align with the values of my company? Now, 7s and 5s, 7, I think, came into play in the last, say, 5 years or so.
I reckon 7s came into play
industry.
Online. I reckon the internet created
online.
the 7, $47
Exactly.
ebooks or $97 programs, or it was just this kind of weird internet thing.
I think people were tired of 9s. I think that, and I haven't seen any research on this, I would suspect that the 7 has a little bit less of a negative connotation than the 9, the 49, the 47. But in my book, the real difference is the $2, right? And if you're a high volume business, if you are a high volume business,
it's a lot.
That can have a huge impact. So you need to take a look at that as well.
I interviewed a fellow a few years ago who had a large discount, a chain of discount stores across Tasmania, which is a state in Australia, and his pricing strategy was based on what everything needed to look like it was a wholesale price: $18.12, $82.63, because he wanted to give the perception that is what he was paying his wholesalers, which I thought was quite smart. And clearly it worked, because it was a pretty successful little business. I remember many years ago when I was trapped in a cubicle in my corporate life, I went for a job at Mercedes-Benz Australia. And one of the questions, I was just a young marketing bloke and knew nothing. Thought I knew everything, but I knew nothing. And one of the questions that the marketing director asked me was, if you took this job, would you support putting prices in our advertising? And I was completely thrown by that question. And even to this day, it still haunts me every now and then, because I actually didn't get the job, and I'm thinking, whatever I answered, I think I said yes. And I think the psychology behind that, and nowadays, more and more car advertising does seem to have prices in it, certainly in Australia. I don't know about Switzerland or any other parts of the world, but it would appear that, I suppose, and again, this all comes back to understanding your ideal customer, but if you're talking about a luxury car, I'm not sure they want to know. They want people to know what they're paying for that luxury car, because it may well be cheaper than what people think. Or it may be much more expensive than what people think. And it's like, wow, you've got too much money. If you've got a view on when to display a price, whether it be in catalogs, you sort of need prices, don't you? But, internet, on websites, in ads, when is there a sort of right or a wrong time?
Well, there's a few things when it comes to especially websites that I ask people to consider. So I rather than answering straight up, I like to help people think it through themselves so that they next time understand the logic and can kind of come up with their own answer, right? So that's why I answer the question with more questions. So the first thing that I ask people is, who do you want to fill? Or no, the first question is actually, do they need the price in order to do something online to complete the transaction? So if they're going to complete the transaction online, then the price has to be there. So that's a simple no-brainer one.
Yeah. So that's an e-commerce business.
Right. The second one is, and if the answer is no, like for a service-based business, then maybe you don't need prices online, or maybe you only need prices for your introductory offers online, right? But not the full service. So the second question I ask people is, who do you want to weed out first? The people who go to your website and say, whew, that's too expensive, I'm done with this, let me look somewhere else. Or the people who say, he doesn't have prices online, what is he hiding?
Yeah.
So it's up to you who you want to weed out first in some context, right? And different businesses will perceive or make different choices in that. Another question that I like to ask people when it comes to putting prices on their website is, how often are they going to be changing and updating prices? And you also have to decide, which prices you're going to put on. So recently I had a client who had two different offers. One was geared towards, say, young people who were just starting out in careers. And another was towards highly educated professionals, if you will. And what they did when they did the website is they had one page for the professionals, one page for the young people, and then a pricing page, and the prices were side by side on the pricing page. And it was horrible.
No doubt.
Because the young people saw the prices on the page, just glanced at it and thought, whoa, I'm out of here, right? They weren't really paying attention to different offers and whatever. And then the highly experienced people are like, oh, wow, why would they have such different prices? That's really weird. So we had to just simply change how they structured the web pages. We removed the pricing page and put the price with the offer, and then that confusion completely went away. So it's not just about, the question isn't just about, should I put them on there or not, but how should it be done? Yeah. So when you do it, you need to be very deliberate and about what you're doing, and think about, what is it communicating to your customers? So one of the things I always talk about with people is that your prices and your behavior around your prices are sending constant messages to your customers. So it's not
behavior,
enough, it's not enough. This is why, if we go back to the very beginning where you asked me what is pricing, we said it's set, get, and manage. Most people focus only on setting a price, and then they think, I'm all done, I can move on with my life. But if you're not getting the price, if you're not communicating it well, whether verbally or in a written form or energetically, whatever it is, if you're not managing those prices over time, then you are missing at least 2/3 of the equation.
So that get part of set, get, and manage, that is the communication. That's how you talk and act around your pricing, is it? And so that could be, okay, that makes a lot of sense, because so often, I'm probably speaking more on behalf of service providers here, but maybe not. There is that point in time when a customer goes, and it's funnily enough, just before we came on air, I had some builders over because we're doing some renovations and we're getting quotes. And I specifically asked for an itemised quote, please give us your prices. Don't give me one price. That's no good to me. And it just becomes, it's at that point, and they were here for an hour and a half, and it was a really good, conversation. But there is a slight dynamic energy change in the conversation when you either ask for an itemised quote or how much do you reckon that's going to be, and sometimes it's hard from the customer to ask that, particularly for more high involvement purchase decisions. We're not talking chocolate bars here, and it's hard. It's hard for the business owner, in this case, the builder, who's kind of, he or she may be embarrassed. They're expensive. They may not know. They may not want to be put in a corner so that when they come back with a quote, I hold it to them. There's a whole lot of, again, this is psychology. I hope the Pricing Lady has someone. Do you have some kind of couch in your consulting rooms where you can lie down as if you were visiting a psychologist?
I always tell people, and your listeners probably won't be able to see this, but I always tell people pricing is all about the psychology, and you have to wiggle your eyebrows when you say that. I say it's all about the psychology, baby, because it really, this is not a research number. This is based on my experience, but pricing is 70% human psychology, and there's two aspects. There's the psychology that you're from your customer side, and there's the psychology internal to your business, how you feel, how your team feels, what they understand, what you understand about pricing. That all has an influence. If you're not paying attention to the leaky bucket, then internally your psychology around pricing is very different. Yeah, and that will influence your behavior and therefore your customer.
Let's talk we've gone all over the world in the world of pricing. I so appreciate this, and I'm sure my listeners will too. Price elasticity, bit of a geeky term, something I learned, I think, in Economics 101 in first year university, but basically talks about the tolerance that your ideal customer has for, low versus high. How do you measure price elasticity in the market? What your market's willing to tolerate? Is it just a matter of pricing something, putting it out there, going, well, that didn't work, we'll, either put it up or down?
I'm so glad you circled back in this direction, because this leads me to, back towards something else I wanted to mention, which is related to this. So price elasticity is basically saying that if I change the price, then my volume will change proportionally. Or even, if I lower the price a little bit, a lot more people will decide to buy from me. That's the typical price elasticity fallacy, if you will, or fallacy of price elasticity. That's what most people think. And here's the thing. So if you have a product that has a gross profit of, I would say 35 or 40%. I always mix up the percentage. Let's say it's 35%. I believe it's 35%. If you have a product with gross profit of 35% and you decide we're going to decrease the price by 10% because we'll get so many more customers that we can make a lot more money. How much more volume do you need in order to break even on profit with this lower price? Any idea?
Can you please answer that question on my behalf? Because you're not talking to Rain Man here.
You need 33% more volume. Wow.
More volume.
Wow. Just to break even. That's not to make more money. That's to break even. And for your typical manufacturing company, 35% gross profit is fairly typical, right? So, but most companies don't do the math. So they don't understand that it's not until 34% that they start earning more money. And it begs the question, where is that volume going to come from? That's the first question. The second question is, how are we going to sustain it? So this goes back to price elasticity. So I think that we believe that most industries will believe that their prices are much more elastic than they are, that if they lower the price, a lot more people will buy, and most companies find out that's not true. If you were positioned overpriced in the market, then you might find that. But if you're well priced in the market and you drop your price, you may get more customers. You need to understand, though, how many more you need in order to achieve the profit that you're looking for, and where those people are going to come from, or those orders are going to come from, because that's where most people get it wrong. I've only seen in my 20 years as a pricing expert, I've only seen it work once, where we dropped the price and we're able to pick up enough volume sustainably in order to make it a wise decision to do once. And we've done it more than once.
At least you done it once. Tell me, Janene, in terms of pricing as part of your marketing, which it is, marketing, I just did marketing at university, and back then there were 4 Ps: product, price, place, promotion.
Now there's like 7, right?
Yeah, well, I always wondered why there wasn't a 5th, at least in people would surely be in there. But anyway, I digress. I encourage my listeners to make marketing a hobby, because when marketing's a hobby, you find time for it, you enjoy it, you put it in your diary, it's an important part of your weekly business regime, if you like. And marketing's made up partly of pricing, but in terms of managing your pricing strategy, and I guess it depends on the industry, but is it a daily thing, a weekly thing, a monthly, yearly? Just give us a mindset around how we as business owners should think about our pricing as an incredibly critical part of running a business.
So as I said at the beginning, I think of it as a way of being or behaving in your business, as opposed to just an activity that you have to do. Of course, there are activities associated with it. And part of what I mean about that is that almost any decision you make in your business potentially will impact what you do with your pricing. So if you change who you're targeting, if your cost structure changes, if you decide to sell this product versus that one, or this service versus a different one, or if you decide to deliver your services to a customer in a different way than you did before, all of those things influence your pricing. So what I mean is that when you're making these business decisions, or when you're making your pricing decisions, you have to think about genau, sorry, that's German. Exactly. I've been over here 21 years, so every once in a while I just mix the languages, right? So you have to understand how those things are influencing and impacting each other. And this goes back again to that impact of 1%. When you understand, if for your business, a 1% price increase has a 7% impact on your profitability, what's really important is it's not just 1% price increase is a 7% impact or improvement in profit. It also means that a 1% drop in your prices has a 7% negative impact on your profit. Pricing is a sword that cuts your profit in both ways. So a lot of businesses are not trying to necessarily get prices up, but they're trying to keep them from falling all the time.
Falling.
Yeah. So you're actually 100%. Trying to compensate for things like inflation, cost of goods, all these other things that are happening. So you have to understand how your business decisions are affecting pricing and how your pricing decisions impact you being able to reach your business objectives.
Well said. Janene, you started off as an engineer with a fascination for bridges. You've become the pricing lady. Just out of interest, what's an average bridge cost?
I have no idea, but
you don't have to answer that.
These days, I have no idea. But I do love bridges.
Good on you. I didn't expect you to answer that. I do love bridges. I'm fascinated by them. Anyway, we digress. Hey, well done to you. I have a marketing question just to finish off, because calling yourself the pricing lady, very powerful, I imagine, as a way of positioning yourself, and you sort of become the generic name for any woman who specializes in pricing. It's very clever. Have you found that in your business, that it's a real point of difference and sort of positions you above the rest of the pack?
What I found is that, one, it is easy for people to remember. Yeah. It makes them curious. Because, people on the one hand, they're like, oh, that's interesting. They're like, well, what does it mean? So it gives me then the opportunity to
glad you asked.
Exactly. And those two things I find really powerful. What is difficult is, since most people don't really understand what pricing is, beyond just finding this number, then, they have a very narrow perception of how I can help them. So in that case, it makes it a little bit harder. But for me, I struggled when I first started the business. Do I call myself a consultant? Do I call myself a coach, a mentor? What is it? And I didn't like any of those terms because they were too generic for my taste.
Yeah. No, I think it's brilliant. And to that point, just to wrap things up, if you do want to work with Janene, head over to thepricinglady.com. Despite being in Switzerland, this internet thing seems to be taking off and not going anywhere. So you can communicate via Zoom and many other ways. But you do consulting, coaching, conference speaking. You've got a podcast. So fantastic. Thepricinglady.com. Janene, thank you for indulging us in a topic that this podcast is 13 years old. This is around about the 600th or so episode, and it's a topic I haven't covered in depth. So thank you for allowing us to do that.
Well, it was my pleasure, and I believe I don't remember the name, but it was one of your listeners who put us in contact with each other. So who you are. Thank you very much as well. Thank you, Tim. Thanks, everyone.
Well, there you go, team. Janene Liston, aka the Pricing Lady. I do love people who make difficult or dry topics fun, interesting, accessible. She does that. She does that really well. So how are you feeling about your pricing strategy now? Are you more confident? What changes are you going to make? I'd love to hear from you. Call the Small Business Big Marketing Hotline on 0480 015 150 and let us all know.
Hi, Timbo. Great show. Daryl here from Strikehold, Australia. Just wanted to connect with you and say I've just joined your tribe on Facebook, so I'm so excited about that. I've been involved probably for about 6 months in listening to your show. I'm a runner and I get up early mornings to go for a run, so I pretty much for the last 6 months have been using your show as my push along, and it really helps motivate me. I do a lot of brain triggering whilst I'm running, and your show really helps me with those little triggers that I can then put into practice. So one that came up recently was the Jeremy Fleming interview you did about pivoting through COVID, and that really excited me. I got a lot from that, as I do with all your other podcasts and your interviews. So, but the one thing I took away from that was, how you can change completely from one industry to a complete other and use your staff as the team to grow it. He had his woodworking carpenter type guy that he could just turn on to, and then they just over that 7-day period they went from nothing to everything in a different industry. So I run a networking group, and I get a lot of tips from your podcast, which I then share with my small tribe here on the Gold Coast in Queensland. And I'm pretty excited to do that. Thanks, Timbo. Take care.
Daryl, Dazza, Delirious. Lots of different versions of the name Daryl. Hey, mate, honoured that I am joining you on your daily runs. That's impressive stuff, running daily. Well, I swim daily, but boy, oh boy, running's not for me. Brain triggering, Daryl. Never heard that before. I imagine it's just like, you hear something and it sparks an idea. I'm glad the Jeremy Fleming episode did that. That was a ripper episode at the very early stages of COVID. He did this incredible pivot from being, he built stages for the likes of Robbie Williams concerts. And then he pivoted to flat pack furniture. I'll put a link in that to that episode over at smallbusinessbigmarketing.com/603. Well worth a listen if you haven't. Hey, everyone else, be like Daryl and call me on 0480 015 150. If you're from overseas, just put a +61 in front of that and drop the first 0. You'll find the number on the website as well, smallbusinessbigmarketing.com. And let me know which episode flicked the switch on you the most. Next week, it's time for you and I to catch up with Tom Willis, who's the founder of LawPath, which is Australia's largest online legal resource for Aussie small businesses. This guy is a marketing genius, and he's used some really, really smart marketing initiatives to get LawPath, wait for it, 250,000 users in just a handful of years. Not only is it a great service to small businesses, but boy, oh boy, the marketing that Tom's done is just, I'd say he has a marketing superpower, put it that way. If you enjoyed today's ep, hit the subscribe button on your favourite podcast app, please, or leave me a review, or both. And you'll find 602 more episodes with successful business founders on your favourite podcast app. Ready to create some helpful marketing? Buy my book, The Boomerang Effect, over at smallbusinessbigmarketing.com. Stocks are running low. Not sure I'm going to reprint it. Hey, first time I've said that, but yeah, just tossing that one up. This show was stitched together by our fantastic editor extraordinaire, Alex Amster. Thank you, Alex. The music bed written, sung, produced by rockstar Lockie Doley, and made possible by the good people at Dell and Studio Hall, who genuinely, seriously care about us small business owners. To you, thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you giving me your time. May your marketing be the absolute best marketing. Bye for now.